Thank you for joining our presentation today. I'm going to be talking to you about SaltMiner. It's a solution that we've built using Elastic, Kibana, and some of our own application code. So thank you again for joining us. My name is Dennis Hurst. I'm the president of Saltworks Security. I've been a developer and in the application security space for about 20 years now. Developer a bit longer than that, but anyway, thank you so much for joining and appreciate you sharing your time with us. So let me talk briefly about what SaltMiner is and what we're going to be demoing today. SaltMiner Community is a free enterprise-grade penetration testing management platform. It's the community version of our commercial project, which I'll talk just really briefly about. Also, by the way, if you've got any questions, feel free to post those in the chat. It should be live now. So if you've got any questions for me, feel free to post those. So again, SaltMiner Community is a free version of our enterprise product. It is built to be very enterprise scalable. Thank you, Elastic, for that one, by the way. One of the reasons we chose Elastic and Kibana was its scalability for the solution. So the fact that we can support thousands of users is extremely helpful. Also, SaltMiner Community supports the concept of importing and exporting data from lots of different data sources. So Elastic is very helpful in that. We're going to talk a bit about how we've used Elastic to achieve some of those things. So let me jump into a quick demonstration of SaltMiner just to help you understand what it is. Basically, SaltMiner is a tool that allows you to aggregate vulnerabilities from lots of different data sources, specifically in the application security space. So things like static analyzers, open source analyzers. There's lots of dynamic testing, which is a type of testing that's done in application security. And aggregate those together and give people a dashboard. So we've built that on top of Kibana that we've just put a custom skin around, and then our code does all the back-end work. So people can do things like you would normally expect in Kibana, click around, filter vulnerabilities, view aggregations and totals and details. One of the problems we ran into, though, is that there's a particular type of data that's really hard to work with, and that's penetration testing data. So that's manual tests that an engineer does, maybe using some tools. And there wasn't a good way to track that. So what we did is we added onto SaltMiner this piece called SaltMiner Community, which is the penetration testing portion of SaltMiner. Again, we've made that available at no charge to the community. So this is built, if you'll notice, it's clearly not Kibana, but we are on the same website. So if we go back over here to SaltMiner, we've got our URL. Notice we're at the same place. We're going to be showing you how we did that, how we make a custom app and the Kibana interface look like they're the same website and talk through that. So in SaltMiner, I can do things like track vulnerabilities, add vulnerabilities, import a vulnerability information from different tools. But behind the covers, all of this is just being stored in Elastic and can be made available through that Kibana interface. So that is a really, really quick overview of what the tool does. And there's some key things that we did along the way that are really interesting use cases, if you will, for Elasticsearch and Kibana and how we made it work. So let's talk briefly about some of the technical reasons we built SaltMiner the way that we did. The scale is one of the biggest reasons for that. The fact that you can scale Elastic to thousands and thousands of users, the flexibility of it, the flexibility to create new dashboards is extremely powerful for us. Also, some of the things, and this really relates when we get into the custom portion of the application, the security of the platform. Kibana and Elastic, we can do document level security. We found it very easy to integrate security from other rights management, for example, from other sources into Elastic so that we could restrict which documents or which data certain people saw. We also like that the authentication is very rich, and that just allows us to build the portions of our application that are custom on top of and in parallel with Elastic and Kibana. So the way we did that, and what this is one of the things I think that's kind of interesting we did, is when you look at the architecture of SaltMiner, what happens is as a user, when you hit the main interface for SaltMiner, what you're really hitting is an Nginx reverse proxy. That reverse proxy then either routes the traffic off to our application, our web application that runs in Linux. It's a .NET Core-based application, or can send that data off to Kibana. So if you're looking at, dashboards that are in Kibana, it's simply routing the traffic from Nginx, the reverse proxy, to Kibana. And if you're looking at our interface, which was that pen testing interface, it's going to route that data to SaltMiner. And then on the back end, both of those are communicating with the Elasticsearch cluster. Also, SaltMiner is communicating directly with Kibana. And this is one of the things we kind of thought was kind of neat we did. We wanted to be able to track the concept that if somebody logs into Kibana, they can still be logged into SaltMiner and back and forth. So if you're working on a pen test and you're going back and forth to dashboards, that should be one login experience, and it should be maintained regardless of which of these two applications actually did the work. So the way that we do that is we actually take the request as they come into SaltMiner, and we peel off the session tokens and send those to Kibana to figure out who the user is. So now we know if I'm Dennis and I logged in to Kibana, when I jump over to the SaltMiner interface, again, it's the same URL, that cookie gets sent to SaltMiner. SaltMiner then sends the cookie to Kibana and basically just asks the question, who am I? And I'll show you how we do that in depth here in just a second. And then SaltMiner can then query based on that user's identity. And I'll show you in detail how we did that right now. So let's look at how that works. So I'm going to switch over from the browser that I was in to a browser and a system called Burp. Burp is a local host proxy. So very simply, the requests that are going from this Chrome browser are being sent to Burp, and it's a really common tool. If you've never used it, it's a great debugging tool. There's a free version out there. It's going to send the request here, and then this is going to go on to the web server. So if we kind of notice the food chain of what goes on, notice I'm sitting on my server looking at the pen test interface. If I just go to SaltMiner by itself, just the URL for my test site, now we're hitting Kibana. But again, we're hitting the same URL. So what we're doing there is, again, that reverse proxy is sitting in front of us. So I'll kind of walk you through the interesting bits of this. When the browser first hit the website, so when I went to log in, it sent a request. That gave me a 302 redirect. Notice this response is also coming from Nginx. That redirected me off to the login page. That's the Kibana's login page. That page then got rendered. A little bit later, we posted. And so when you enter your username and password on the website, it's going to send your username and password in the request. And then the response that comes back, a couple of interesting things happen here. The most interesting of those is this cookie gets set. So Kibana is using a session ID or a cookie called SID. So that cookie will now be sent to any request on that web server. So remember from our architecture we looked at just a second ago, we're actually hitting an Nginx server, and then the request is going off to either SaltMiner or Kibana. So when we jump in there, this cookie comes in. At this point, everything works. We're just normal Kibana running. But if you'll notice when we get to, actually I want to share another thing. There is a request that we found, and this is a standard thing that's in Kibana. And if you monitor the traffic, you'll notice it does this. Once you're logged in, there's this API endpoint called internal security me. And the response on that tells you who you are. So Kibana uses that to figure out what your username is, what your roles are. It's kind of a GUI, end user kind of thing. It's really helping Kibana to do a better job of serving data to you. So we actually call that. So behind the covers, what's happening is SaltMiner is calling that API endpoint, which with passing in this session token. So the session token goes to SaltMiner. SaltMiner grabs that cookie, sends it off to Kibana. Kibana responds back and says, this is who that user is. At this point, I am now effectively logged in. So at this point, we start getting into SaltMiner, that pen test interface, which is this SMP GUI. That's our little URL we use. And now we're logged in using the same session token. So what we're doing is kind of piggybacking off the back of Kibana. Nice thing about that too is every time we send information in through the GUI, if we'll go back over to our PowerPoint here, every time I send a request to SaltMiner from my GUI, it's going to ask Kibana, who am I? Which is nice because it also refreshes the session token. So now Kibana, we're still staying live in Kibana, we're staying live in SaltMiner. If the session timed out, not a problem. SaltMiner would send a session token that's timed out. Kibana would tell you you're logged out. At that point, we just redirect the user back to the login screen. So pretty straightforward process for doing that. But it's a really nice way to piggyback off of what Elastic and Kibana give you as a way to get authentication. So once we integrate Kibana with this authentication, we don't have to integrate our application to anything custom. So if you're using Active Directory integration, Kerberos, whatever your single sign-on source is that you wired up in Kibana, we're simply using the session token that Kibana has, so we don't have to redo that. So really nice interface because we have a single sign-on. We're using Kibana as that single sign-on, and our session state is being managed by Kibana as well. So really nice. As far as a hacker getting in there, really it's all of this is happening on the back end, very similar to what would happen with any traditional single sign-on source. We're kind of playing the same game, if you will. So because we're not trusting the end user, we're trusting only Kibana. The only thing we really trust from the end user is that cookie. So, and the cookie is cryptographically random, and it's something that the user already has once they log into Kibana anyway. So fairly straightforward approach to doing that. Next thing I want to show you in the application that we're doing, some other interesting things we've worked on. We're not seeing that. Is the format of the data that we use on the back end. So on the back end, we're storing the data in the Elastic ECS format. If you're not familiar with it, it's the Elastic Common Schema. It's a standard structure of data for IT data. One of those things is a vulnerability. So in researching that, we really like that format. It actually gives us a lot of value. We happen to be storing either application security automated testing data, like DAS scans or static scans, and pen test data. It's all vulnerabilities. So we use the vulnerability record in ECS, but then ECS has a standardized way to customize or put unique data. So for example, the vulnerability record defines certain key things that we have to put in there. So we put information about our vulnerabilities under the vulnerability. We also then extend that with a SaltMiner section that's separate from the vulnerability record following the ECS standard. And that's where we keep information that's specific to SaltMiner, specific to more application security, vulnerability scanning type things. And we also then can do the same thing for any customer custom data. So what we find is that as we're setting all of this up, there may be things that a customer wants to calculate. For example, this customer wanted to calculate something called a star rating. They also wanted to know their days to close. Well, we were really easily able to use an ingest pipeline for that. We calculate based on the data that comes in this rating, which is a mathematical formula, just using a painless script. We store that in this custom attribute that we've created for the customer. We also calculated the number of days to close. This is a case where if something is removed, we know when it was removed and we know when it was found. So we know how long it took to close. So we can show things like mean time to remediation. But using this pattern, we have, again, that general ECS data from the vulnerability. We have our product specific information under SaltMiner. And if you go look at ECS data, you'll see lots of vendors do this. Microsoft, AWS, pretty much everybody does it this way. So it's a nice standardized way to do it. And then we can create, again, custom areas specifically for a customer implementation if there's unique things they want to do with their ingest pipelines. So that was the next big thing, that this has been hugely valuable. If the customer is currently using Elasticsearch and they're using it for vulnerabilities from other systems like network vulnerabilities, that's great. We can sit right alongside those and then show them application vulnerabilities, which is what we're concerned about, along beside their network vulnerabilities or their endpoint vulnerabilities, anything like that. So again, kind of helping the whole ecosystem work better together. The last thing that we did that was interesting was the skinning. So if you'll notice when we get into SaltMiner, we've skinned Elasticsearch or Kibana. So this is actually not as bad as it seemed. We basically followed a project out there, and there's Eliza Katz. Thank you, by the way. She helped us out with this. She's the person that runs this particular GitHub repo, and it's called Custom Kibana Theme. So what this theme allows you to do, it's a little Java project. You basically download it, make the edits you want to some style sheets, and it's documented pretty well how you do that. So what we're doing is we're overriding actually, and I can log out to kind of show you how that works. What we're actually doing is overriding the login screen. So we're able to override the logo, the name, a little loading screen. We're able to override as well things like logos up here, background colors, and not everything, but a good number of attributes around the application. So once you've done this, you compile this, go out, download this little library, recompile it with some customizations, again, your logos and things like that. And then you really just load that theme in. So that's pretty simple set of commands. You're going to go out, stop Kibana, sorry about that. Install the new plugin that you've created. And then you're going to let it load up and make sure everything works. And then you'll restart Kibana. So you will have to have a development machine to create that file on, but once you've got it, you just copy it into any Kibana instance, and it works great so far. So that's really the big things that we've done. Again, Liza, thank you again for all your help on that project. She's been a real active person in the community. So those are the big changes that we've made to the system. And I know we've got a few minutes left, and I went pretty quick on that. Are there if there's any detailed questions, I could jump in and answer those. Let's see. If I cannot see the screen right now, let me jump in real quick. Eddie, if you can see that by any chance, I cannot see the chat. For some reason, it's locked me out. So, all right. Well, I am going to go ahead and wrap up. I think we've got a few minutes left. But again, if you've got any questions, feel free to email me. My email address is right there on the screen. I'll make it just a bit larger. You can email me, dennis@saltworks.io. Be happy to go into deeper. If you want me to make any videos that go kind of deeper into any of these topics I've talked about, showing more specifics, we'll be happy to do that. Just let me know, and we could post that somewhere on YouTube or wherever we need to get that posted out. We could be happy to answer those questions. So thank you again for attending. Appreciate it. And I hope you have a great day.